My name is Jim Graham, and today I'm going to do a quick walkthrough of Azure Data Factory for you. The example data flows I'll be showing extract data from 4 tables in a SQL Server database, load it to Azure Data Lake storage, and then finally into Azure Synapse Analytics. We're going to start here in Azure Data Studio, which is a Microsoft product. It's kind of a mix between SQL Server Management Studio and Visual Studio Code Editor. This product is available for Windows and Mac, and you can do all your SQL right here inside of Azure Data Studio. You can see here we can list our tables. These are our source tables here in SQL Server, and then some destination tables down here on Azure Synapse. In the process of moving the data from SQL Server to Azure Synapse Analytics, we're also going to make a stop in the middle in our Azure Data Lake. This step is optional for smaller, less complicated data sets, but most companies really can benefit from utilizing the cheap storage of a data lake to keep all of their structured and unstructured data so that they can feed it into their analytics platforms. All right, we're going to go over to our Edge browser now. So what you're looking at is actually Azure Data Factory. At its most basic, Azure Data Factory is SSIS running in my web browser. So that's what you're seeing right here. This is the interface, the development interface for Azure Data Factory. This software is running, like I said, in Microsoft Edge on my Mac. Everything you're going to see me demo today was developed on my Mac using software developed by Microsoft. So you don't have to have Windows anymore. Not that there's anything wrong with Windows, but all of this can be done on the Mac. So here in Azure Data Factory, here on the left side, you can see we have pipelines and data sets. So pipelines are the bundles of activities that allow us to move our data from one data source to another or process that data in some sort of way. Pipelines are made up of activities. At their most basic, activities are made up of copying data from a source to a target, or sync as they use here in Azure Data Factory. In addition to copying data from source to target, you can also process data using Databricks, which is another Azure application using Java or Python. You can use Azure HD Insight, which allows you to use Hive or MapReduce to process your data. And you can even do things such as machine learning pipelines directly here inside of Azure Data Factory. The first pipeline I'm going to show you is the pipeline that picks up the data out of SQL Server and drops it into Azure Data Lake storage. So starting here, we see that we set the timestamp for the process, and then there are 4 copy processes that run in parallel for the 4 different data sets that we're going to be processing. So if we look at one of those, here we can see the source is a table in our Azure SQL Server, and the sync or target is Azure Data Lake storage. And so what this is doing is copying data out of SQL Server into Azure Data Lake storage as a CSV file that is zipped up and dropped into Azure Data Lake storage. The final step here calls a logging procedure for each of these copy data activities, so we have all the information around that copy activity logged into our database. So when this process is finished, that data is now in Azure Data Lake storage, and if we flip back here to another Microsoft application, Azure Storage Explorer, we can see here in our incoming folder that we have 4 files, each with a prefix and a suffix, and they are gzipped files for those 4 tables. So this is where the information goes when we extract out of SQL Server. So once it's in Azure Storage, in Azure Data Lake storage, which we can browse using the Storage Explorer, then the data is picked up by another pipeline and transformed into Azure Synapse Analytics. So this is our second pipeline here that we're going to see. What this does is it watches that incoming folder that we just saw in Azure Data Lake, and then it filters the file based on the file types, checks to see if we have a file of that type for today's run, and if it does, it actually runs a truncate on the destination or target table so that this information is loaded into a clean table, and then it does a for each loop for every file that it finds of that type in our incoming folder it loads it into that table. So if we look in one of these for each loops, we can double click and we see that there's a couple activities in here. It gets the file name. It runs one of those copy data activities where our source is the incoming file from Data Lake storage. Our sink or target is our ASDW, which is Azure SQL Data Warehouse, which is now Azure Synapse Analytics. And then it archives that incoming file to a done folder. And then it also calls our logging, so it logs the copy data information to the database. And so once that's complete, the data will be moved from an incoming folder to a done folder inside our blob container, as we can see here. And then at that point, the data exists here in our blob storage, in our staging tables in Synapse, and then where it started was from the SQL Server tables that we have there.